I'm Jeff Randall. I am on the advisory board for CFI DC, and I'm just a random person who decided to speak about something he knows nothing about. Today I'm going to talk about the origins of conspiracy theories, not getting too much into specific conspiracies, just kind of what are the mental processes that lead to believing crazy shit. Things like the New World Order, things like 9/11 truth, the fact that the presidents have all been reptilian aliens, or that one's actually not a conspiracy theory, that's true. Chemtrails, who shot JFK. I don't believe any of these things, but I find them absolutely fascinating because you're taking real world events and you're just making crap up. And I love trying to think about, is there some way that these things could be true? If Lee Harvey Oswald didn't shoot JFK, who did? How many people had to know about it? And you start getting into things like, if the Apollo moon landings were faked, if you look at it all, it means that about 250,000 people had to be in on it. 250,000 people have kept silent for the last 40 years about something that big. That's not going to happen. And if these conspiracies are able to be this grand, 9/11, it's able to be this grand, how did they leave such obvious proofs? Like, there are people who say that there was an episode of The Simpsons the year before 9/11 that Lisa had a 9 and an 11 in some book or something. And it's supposed to prove that Fox News knew that 9/11 was coming. So there's this conspiracy to kill thousands of people. Fox News knows about it, but they're going to let it slip on The Simpsons? I mean, come on. You don't let that shit slip on The Simpsons. So what is a conspiracy theory? In general ideas, it's a pejorative term. When you say conspiracy theory, you're not talking about something like Watergate, which actually was a conspiracy. You're talking about generally things that aren't truly conspiracies, or that the conspiracy has been blown up out of proportion. These are virtually always fringe theories. If it's the generally accepted truth, it's generally not going to be called a conspiracy theory. They're used to explain historical events or current events, things, usually major events, like 9/11 is going to have a conspiracy theory. Why my traffic sucked this morning isn't. They're very rarely supported by any conclusive evidence, because if they were supported by evidence, then they wouldn't be conspiracy theories, they'd be reality. And they generally will contrast or contradict the primary version of events. So if people want to say that Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK, the conspiracy is going to say virtually anybody else, or in some cases, everybody else in the world shot JFK. But why do these things matter? I mean, if somebody wants to believe that Bush was in charge of 9/11 or that Dick Cheney was in charge, why does it matter? It matters because it becomes so common in mass media today, and it matters because the more that we allow these types of ideas to spread, the less critical thinking people are doing. If people are constantly referring to the 9/11 truth movement as if it's anything other than insane, you're going to have people who start saying, well, if the government could do 9/11, then they could do this. And you kind of end up going down a rabbit hole of insanity. So what are the origins? There's a few major things. Questioning the official truth, seeing patterns where patterns don't exist, searching for anomalies, distrust of a group or some government body, feeling powerless yourself, making shit up, and then stopping questioning. And it's interesting that it starts with a questioning and then it ends with stopping questioning, and we'll get into that. questioning, generally a conspiracy is going to come from an attempt to answer some question. If people don't want to believe that bin Laden started 9/11, then the question is, if he didn't do it, then who? If somebody wants to believe that the president or some head of state is an alien, well, then if they're an alien, how did they get here? What type of alien? Why is David Icke insane? Things like that. And generally, the idea of questioning is a very good thing. But a lot of questions have answers. And when you find those answers, you don't need to keep asking the same question over and over, especially if your question started off kind of insane. Seeing patterns where none exist. Skeptic magazine. Who's the guy from Skeptic? Michael Shermer has a lot of books about this. The idea of seeing patterns where none exist. We're really, really good at seeing patterns. We look at a tree and we see a face in the tree. We look at a group of people and we'll see some sort of pattern in it. We're very, very good at that. But it can kind of go too far and we see patterns where nothing existed. So we see an event happen on 9/11 where somebody made a stupid comment about we should pull Building 7. Well, a lot of people see that and they see a couple other things that they think are weird and they see all those little teeny things turn into a pattern that to them means clearly George W. Bush had something to do with it or somehow Obama had something to do with it even though nobody knew who he was yet. I'm sure that's coming. The next one is anomaly hunting. So if somebody says something in the heat of a tragedy, you're not always thinking straight. You're going to say stuff that you don't necessarily mean. You're going to use the wrong words. You're going to say something that just on further reflection seems a little weird. But when you're actually in the heat of the moment, you're just saying stuff. So when somebody said, pull Building 7 on 9/11 a couple hours before it fell, they weren't giving an order to destroy the building. They were saying, pull the people out of it. They used a poor choice of words, maybe. That doesn't mean that 9/11 was a conspiracy. It doesn't mean, and I would love nothing more than to believe George Bush did it, because he's a vile human being, but he didn't. So you look at all these little anomalies, and in most cases, they're not really anomalies. They're apparent anomalies. So if you think that the towers fell faster than they could fall, and you actually look at it and you talk to scientists and you find out that, no, they really would have fallen at the exact speed that they did, because they did fall at the exact speed that they did. You see something that you think is an anomaly, it gets explained to you, and you don't accept that explanation, you're getting towards a conspiracy theory. Distrust of some group. In some cases, these are fully justified. When Hillary Clinton said there was a vast right-wing conspiracy out to get her and her family, there was. It was called Fox News. When Tony Blair says we face an aggressive secular attack from without, in some cases he is true, because secularists are finally fighting back for the first time virtually ever. He's a little insane in the fact that he thinks it's a bad thing, but there are reasons to distrust groups. There are reasons that people distrust groups that aren't valid, but distrusting a group, especially a group in power, will tend to lead towards a conspiracy type of mindset. One of the best examples of this is Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck has an absolute hatred and distrust of anything to do with liberals, progressives, black people, basically anyone who's not white and him, or paying him, or listening to him. A feeling of powerlessness. If you are part of a group of people and you don't feel that you have power, you're going to wonder why you don't have power. What makes those people in power better than me? Why can they do these things and I can't? If you take that far enough along, you're going to start thinking that they're out to get you. If they're out to get you, then why are they out to get you? Does them being out to get you help explain why your traffic was bad this morning, or why certain people want the economy to collapse so that they can steal your house from you, whatever it is. If you start feeling that you are powerless, then you're going to have that distrust of other groups, and you're kind of pushing your way towards conspiracies. This one's my favorite. In some cases, it doesn't have to do with hating a group, or it doesn't have to do with you feeling powerless. It's just people make shit up all the time. Again, Glenn Beck is the perfect example of this. One of my favorite ones from this is The Onion. Back during the W years, they did a spoof news thing where it was that the government was creating these FEMA concentration camps, and they were about to start rounding people up and putting them into FEMA concentration camps. This was on The Onion. It's a satirical news website. Nobody paid any attention to it. A few years later, during the Obama administration, some right-wing bloggers picked it up. They picked it up and they said, see, this proves what we've been saying about Obama all along. An article from The Onion written during the W years proves what they've said about Obama. That's making shit up. I mean, there's no way around it. It's just, there's no way to explain it as, oh, but they mean well, oh, but they saw these patterns, oh, but this group really does do some things. They just made shit up. It's something that doesn't happen as often as the others, but when it does, it's much more obvious, much more blatant. The final thing is stopping questioning. Once you have your conspiracy, nothing that anyone can say to you is going to dissuade you of that conspiracy. If somebody shows you evidence against the conspiracy, then they're part of the conspiracy, obviously. If you see evidence against the conspiracy yourself, obviously the conspirators placed that evidence there to throw people off the track. If you have a question and somebody answers that question perfectly, clearly that's part of the conspiracy. There's nothing that you can say. If somebody wants to believe 9/11 is an inside job, they're going to believe it no matter what evidence you put there. If somebody wants to believe that man never landed on the moon, you can introduce them to Buzz Aldrin, and after he hits them, they're not going to change their mind. You can have them watch the episode of Mythbusters, and even though the Mythbusters disprove the main objections to whether or not man landed on the moon, you still have people sitting there saying, well, no, but they didn't prove this little tiny thing, or they did this proof the wrong way. There's not enough evidence in the world for people once they have this conspiracy. And at this point, even though we started, the conspiracy would start off with a valid question, at this point they're stopping questioning. They're never going to question their own assumptions again. Once you have that conspiracy generated, the people involved with it want to just shut it down and say, this is what happened. There are people who believe that the HAARP up in Alaska is designed to change the weather, and we don't have that kind of technology yet. I'm working on it. But it doesn't matter if you show them exactly what it was built for. You show them the specs that it was built from. You take them to the place. Jesse Ventura had this really horrible TV show a couple years ago. And he went to the HAARP array. He saw it for himself. He had access to people who worked at it. He still went on the air with this stupid TV show about the HAARP array is out to change the weather or to somehow cause all these things. And he had the evidence in front of him. He just stopped questioning. Once he decided in his mind that the HAARP array was a bad thing, nothing was going to change his mind, and he wasn't going to question any of the assumptions he had made. You kind of get to a point where there's no question that you're willing to ask of yourself, and there's no answer for any of your questions that you're willing to accept. And at that point, it has become a full-blown conspiracy theory in your mind. The last thing is that not every conspiracy has all of these. Not everybody's going to make stuff up. make shit up for a conspiracy. Not every conspiracy involves some big, vast group. Not every conspiracy involves seeing patterns. But in general, conspiracy theories will involve a number of these. It may not involve every single one. They may not always come in this order, but it's going to involve these basic ideas. And each step along the way to a conspiracy is a very small step. You don't start off the day of 9/11 saying, clearly George Bush did it. You start off the day of 9/11 saying, oh my God, what the hell happened? And then you get the official story and it doesn't make sense. And maybe that story didn't make sense at first. Nothing made sense at first after that. But when you start trying to find small little anomalies because you don't like the answer, you're going to lead down a rabbit hole and you're going to end up with a conspiracy theory. I kind of rushed through that. So any questions?
So how do you determine, especially in cases where two conspiracy theories are sort of pitted against each other, which is the real conspiracy? I'm going to use an example that is different from the ones that you use, since most of what you used were sort of right-wing kind of conspiracies. And then you have situations where there's potentially a conspiracy theory associated with the left-wing side, like the current Occupy Wall Street, where Wall Street and public corporations and everybody's in cahoots to keep us down. I may think that's true, personal bias, but you certainly have Fox News and other right-wing people telling you that, no, that's a conspiracy theory, that that's not the case. When, we're sitting there at home watching, hopefully not Fox News, but watching the news, and the media is presenting you with a story, a narrative. How do we look through that for things that are probably more subtle or more nuanced than the average person?
I think you start off saying that any assumptions that I have are open to being questioned. So with something like Occupy Wall Street, if you believe that the banks and the corporations and Fox News and the 1% is out to get the rest of us, take a look at what types of policies were put into effect that got us to where we are. Look at the organizations that sprung up to do lobbying on behalf of the banks. Look at the politicians that put these policies into effect. And then look at the sources. If on one hand you have a source which is the Washington Post, and on the other hand you have the Washington Times, one of those is slightly more credible than the other. And by slightly, I mean the Washington Times is insane. The Post isn't perfect, but they do have a history of breaking actual news stories. The Washington Times doesn't. One of the perfect examples of this is before Watergate broke. Anyone who said that Nixon was engaged in a conspiracy to try to make sure that he won the next election, that would have been considered a conspiracy theory. The moment that Deep Throat went to Woodward and Bernstein, it was no longer a conspiracy theory because there was evidence to back it. If you follow the evidence wherever it leads, whether it leads for the direction that you want it to lead or it leads the direction you don't want it to lead, as long as you're following the evidence will win out in the end. With Occupy Wall Street, you have to start looking at where the evidence leads. And I tend to think it's going to lead one specific direction, which my bias is pretty obvious.
You said that if the moon landing weren't true, there would have to been, did you say 25,000 people in on it?
250.
250. Where did you get that number?
Phil Plate. It's basically the people who worked at NASA, the people who worked for the organizations that were building things for NASA. The basic estimate is anywhere from 125 to 500, and he kind of whittles that down to about 250,000 people would have known that it was faked. You can argue with the exact number. Say he's even an order of magnitude off, and it's only 25,000 people. You still have 25,000 people that have been silent for 40 years that would have definitive proof. With the moon landing, you also have the fact that at that time, no one in the world had more incentive to show that that was faked than Russia. Why didn't they say it? If we didn't really land, shouldn't Russia have just been sitting there going, hey guys, news media, that was done on a sound stage. They would have known. They were watching us as well as anyone's ever watched us in history. China has every incentive in the world to show that today that we faked it back then. There's too many people that would know in something like that. And most conspiracies, once they grow, they get to a point where you've got hundreds or thousands of people that would know about the conspiracy, and it only takes one of those people to break it. And in all of these conspiracies, you never get that one person. You get the fringe person who says, I've heard it was fake. Or you get the fringe person who says, I worked at Area 51 and I saw the alien bodies, but then you check their background. They never worked at Area 51. In fact, at the time when they say they worked at Area 51, they were actually in school back east or whatever it is. The larger the conspiracy, the more people who would know about it.
What causes a conspiracy theory to fall out of favor? There was a conspiracy theory about Andrew Johnson wanting to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. However, that, over the course of 150, 200 years, that's fallen out of favor. So what would cause current conspiracy theories to fall by the wayside?
In some cases, just time. With something like JFK, 20 years ago, there was a movie about the fact that it was conspiracy. Everyone talked about it. Today, 9/11's kind of taken over. Nobody really talks too much about JFK anymore. Time is a big factor in that. For something to get out of favor much, much quicker, you usually just need very hard, very definitive evidence very quickly before the conspiracy takes hold. With something like vaccines causing autism, yes, you still have a few fringe people that hold on to it, but that is by far a minority view because the evidence shows otherwise. If the evidence was a little more wishy-washy, that conspiracy could have blown up much, much bigger than it did. Which means you have Andrew Wakefield, who's one lone douchebag, causing thousands upon thousands of people to die.
One quick, small correction / caveat to what Bruce said. 9/11 truth is pretty bipartisan. In fact, I think it's more leftist, unfortunately, that buy that.
It started very left-wing, but it's gotten a lot more right-wing over the years.
I guess my question is, can you think of something that was an actual conspiracy, not considered by some to be a conspiracy theory, but something that was, there wasn't really much to go there, but that ended up turning into something that actually, this actually happened?
Watergate.
Okay.
Watergate's a perfect one. There were people who had said things, and there was a lot of whispers around DC before the story broke that something had gone on. And as soon as the story broke, it went from, there's this fringe conspiracy theory to, fuck, Nixon was an asshole. Yes, as you can tell, I hold back a lot. Anyone else?
On the subject of conspiracy theories falling out of favor, I don't know if many people have seen that Dylan Avery, Mr. Loose Change, Mr. 9/11 conspiracy, is starting to back away. He still says, well, there was something behind it, but what I was saying 5 years ago might not actually be the case.
I've heard him concede on very, very specific individual points. I haven't heard him, and I just might not have heard it.
But he's beginning to just sort of step back a little bit. I think he's growing up.
Okay. Oh, so cute. Yes.
I think another big part of conspiracy theories is trusting on experts with, I'll say, dubious credentials. Like with the autism caused by vaccines thing, you'll have all these doctors who, are saying, well, there's no link between vaccines and autism, and on the other side, you have parents. Say, I'm a parent, I know what's good for my child, I know what happens to my child.
In some cases, that's the distrust of some group. In that case, they're saying that me as a mommy, I know more about my kid than these so-called expert doctors know. I mean, what do they know? They went to school for a dozen years, and they've been doing this their entire life. But I have a baby, so I know better. And in some cases, at least with autism and vaccines, Wakefield did have the capability of knowing the truth. In his particular case, money, greed, and just stupidity caused him to lie. But if it wasn't for Wakefield, those mothers wouldn't have had something to grab onto. Once they had something to grab onto from Wakefield making his shit up, then it was distrust of anybody in that group of doctors who disagreed with what they believed because of what Wakefield told them.
And it's also anecdotal evidence over empirical.
Exactly. Anecdotes over evidence. The plural of anecdote is not data. It's a pithy little line, but it's true. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000 anecdotes. It's still not data until you're doing a controlled test of some kind.
Well, one thing that I wanted to kind of mention along these lines is I've run into a lot of conspiracy theorists since becoming a skeptic. And one thing I've seen, and it's not universally true, but as skeptics, we have a tendency to be really blunt and direct with these people. And a lot of the things that lead to these conspiracies, like questioning, seeing patterns, anomaly, distrust, or the fear of powerlessness, a lot of those things, actually, if you think about it, have a lot to do with what drives the scientific method. We distrust our current knowledge. We fear that we don't understand certain things. We fear disease. We fear these things. And it's just pushing the science forward. And I found, personally, it's been very useful to kind of address those points of the conspiracy. Like, yes, excellent, you're looking for questioning, you're questioning this, but you're not applying it fully. As you were saying later, the questioning stops and it breaks down. And taking that approach of being, receptive to what it is they're saying and trying to help them use their own logic to find holes in what they're attempting.
Yeah, definitely when you're talking with somebody who believes in a conspiracy, being as blunt as I am is rarely a good idea. In general, I'm going to piss off somebody who believes in a conspiracy because I'm going to call them a moron. I'm going to ridicule everything that they hold sacred in life. I shouldn't be the one going out there trying to tell people why their conspiracies are wrong, just because I have fun ridiculing them. But if you really want to reach these people, you have to do what you said. Sit there and explain to them, yes, what you're doing is a good thing. Looking for anomalies is good. Don't take it too far. Seeing patterns is good. It's reasonable. It's rational. Don't take it too far. Questioning is always good. Never stop questioning. But eventually, you will find answers. Once you find answers, you don't need to keep asking the same question over and over and over and over and over again. And the biggest one that I've found with conspiracy theorists is that once they have their answer, when they stop questioning, that's something that you have to figure out a way to explain to them. There is still more to learn here. There's still some questions that you haven't asked yourself. And granted, I'm not the best at dealing with these types of people because I like ridiculing them and I find that fun. But if you don't like ridiculing them and you actually want to make a difference, sit down and talk with them.
Yes. I was going to say with autism and vaccines, I think another major component is not just the uncertainty, but also a lot of fear and guilt, even though it's an unjustified guilt. I think a lot of parents, when they realize their kid isn't the perfect ideal of what they expected, regardless of what disease it is, they want a cause and they want something that was not their fault. They don't want to think that they possibly did something wrong. They want to think that they got led astray, it wasn't their fault, and they're going to work hard to deal with it. But unfortunately, they're addressing the wrong problem in this case. But I think that's a major portion, is people saying, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I've been wonderful for my kid, and we're great parents, and it must have been this.
Guilt can definitely lead to something like that. In some sense, it's kind of that feeling of powerlessness. You as a parent should be able to protect your children. And if there's this thing that you can't protect them from because they have autism, you feel so powerless and you feel guilty. What did I do wrong? Did I raise them wrong? Whatever it is. And it's a hard thing to deal with. Guilt of any kind is hard to deal with. Guilt over something that affects your children has got to be unimaginably horrible. All right, one last question. Anybody? Yes?
How often is the other group being distrusted the government as opposed to some other group? How often is the government?
In most cases, it's going to be a large group, whether it's something like the Catholic Church or some large organization or some fictional large organization like the Illuminati. Because the government is such a large one, it's going to be them a lot. But I'm done. Thank you all.